So today I'm going to share with you the PowerPoint created to work with the children's conversations about faith and spirituality. Now, this PowerPoint is aimed at a church or parish and school environment. So the questions that follow within the PowerPoint are aimed for that context as well. So please bear that in mind as we go through. All of the PowerPoints will be kept in a format that you can tweak and adapt to serve your own context. So it may be that you want to change the design somewhat, or you may want to ask different questions for the context that you're dealing with and the audience that you're dealing with, which is fine. But please do not amend the actual main body of content, because this could mean the findings themselves are then misrepresented. So it's coming across in that format with that understanding. This PowerPoint and the other PowerPoints are available on request via our email nexus@canterbury.ac.uk, and again, don't worry about making notes of that because we can put that in the chat as we go forward. And if I forget to do it, please remind me. So each of the PowerPoint presentations includes this slide explaining what is meant by the term nexus. So the term nexus, in terms of what it means in relation to the Faith in the Nexus report. So you get that understanding of what it means to speak about the Nexus of Faith, but then you also get an overview of the project itself. So this slide is really about setting the general context for your main presentation. I'm just going to try and move that on. For some reason, I've stalled. Bear with me. There we go. The next slide then outlines the main questions and findings that emerge from the research, in this case related to faith and spiritual conversations in the home. Our research revealed that children love to ask questions and look to be listened to. They're not necessarily looking to be answered, but they do want that space to question, to talk, to be listened to, and more importantly, to be heard. However, some parents and some adults, especially within the home setting, struggled with these conversations. And really, this is about trying to encourage and empower parents to feel confident to have such conversations in the home. This slide provides the common approach taken by children when engaging in faith conversations within the home, and it was found by our research that children were often initiators of such talk, and school activities and lessons throughout the day tended to act as the stimulus for these conversations. Popular questions that ignited their curiosity and wonder often tended to be around the existence and nature of God, creation and the origins of life, religion and science. When parents did feel overwhelmed by such conversations, they often turned to grandparents for support. And this is an excellent way of encouraging these conversations by involving that intergenerational support. So that would be one way to encourage faith conversations in the home. When the parents are feeling quite isolated and overwhelmed, yes, some of them will turn to the school again, some of them will turn to the local church or the parish for those questions to be answered, but actually drawing on the intergenerational support of the wider family is a good way of encouraging such conversations. This slide considers examples of questions parents said their children asked. And again, you could see this as a time to stop and ask how those in your audience would answer such questions like, is there a real God? Are gran and granddad going to die because they're quite old? How would we deal with those questions if they came home? And it would be a good discussion point. And what support could we offer parents facing such questions? And just to note, throughout the PowerPoint, there are pauses for consideration that you see in these grey boxes. Most of the pause for consideration questions in this PowerPoint and the others can be found at the end of the poster section of the PDFs themselves. So everything that's in this PowerPoint really can be read and followed within the PDFs, which actually helps when you're doing a whole group presentation. With this slide, the focus switches from the children and their conversations to the challenges some parents said they faced. Many felt inadequate as they couldn't provide answers or respond with the correct language. Some didn't hold the same beliefs as the school, and so they didn't want to confuse their children with mixed messages. So rather than engage in what they thought, they shut the conversation down. And others simply didn't feel that they had enough knowledge or faith of their own to actually contend with these questions. You see here some of the quotes from the parents. He comes home and asks, what was there before God? How do you answer that? You know what I mean? How do you answer the question when they say, why does everybody have to die? It really is a minefield of challenge for some parents, especially when they don't feel confident. And sometimes it's not even as simple as dealing with the questions that they bring home from school. It's decoding what they come home from school with, what they think they've heard. I know when I was looking at this, it reminded me of when I was a parent and my young son came home from school. We were driving home one day and just out of the blue, he said, and he declared it quite proudly, "Did you know, Mum, that the Pope is inflatable?" Now, I knew what he was trying to say because I had my own faith understanding. But if I was a parent that had no understanding of papal infallibility, I'd just mark that off as something that was out of the blue, out of the ordinary, and shut it down. Maybe it would be something I'd laugh at, but it isn't just about hearing what the children come home from school directly with. It's trying to decode what they think they've heard as well. And it's really considering the different ways that we can support families in articulating the language of faith and spirituality to their children. How can we do that in our own setting? In other words, how can we support parents in supporting their children? One way to support parents is for schools to communicate key themes and topics that they are likely to raise within the school environment. Many children and parents said a key stimulus for them was RE lessons. And I wonder how many parents know in advance what the syllabus or the scheme of work is and what type of questions children raise from these studies. What are the type of questions that arise from them? Because I think if parents could see this and maybe they could preempt, they can't plan for, but they could preempt some of the questions that their own children could come home with and be ready for it. And it could give a sense of confidence, especially to parents who struggle. It's a good idea also for the local church or local parish and school to actually communicate with each other. As Sunday school, children's liturgy, sacramental preparation, etc., may be pitched at a very different level to what the same children experience in the school. And have we ever thought about that? So you could have children preparing for First Holy Communion in a school setting within RE, dealing with really challenging questions. And sometimes then within the church setting or the local parish setting, those questions aren't so challenging. And it then becomes a lost opportunity to encourage a deeper search for meaning. And often, remember, in church settings, the parents sit alongside their children when these teachings are given. So it could be a way of informing parents as well. Parents said they felt more confident when the conversations were focused on the values informing the school ethos. Quite often, these values are spoken of, shared and modelled by the adults linked to the school. The language of values seems far more inclusive and universal and embedded in everyday language, and so therefore it makes sense that the parents feel more confident to have discussions around values in the home. But it does beg the question then, for both the school and the local church or parish context, how can we ensure matters of faith and spirituality are also underpinned with a common language, so that it fosters that same sense of confidence in the home and encourages those conversations? I was speaking to one parent recently about this, and she said when she attends church, she learns so much more about her own faith when the language is aimed at the children. For her, she said, if preaching and teaching is pitched at a child's understanding, then you capture the adult's understanding quite naturally. And I suppose what she was saying when she was explaining to me, she said, as you can have some very intellectually mature adults in a room who may be emotionally immature, you can equally have mature, intellectual, emotionally mature adults in a room that are spiritually immature. And it can be embarrassing then to reach out and say, I don't quite understand this. If you're someone in a community that is seen to be quite intellectually mature, and then you're saying, I don't understand this concept, that takes an awful lot of courage. But if they're in a setting where they're sat alongside their children, they don't have to reach out in that same way, and yet they're still being fed, and their own spirituality and literacy is improving. Faith conversations at home vary depending on the time and space given for them in each family. Unfortunately, some children spoke of such conversations not happening in the home. Many spoke of seeking out their own reflection within the home in the quiet areas of their house, maybe the bedroom or a garden. So they still seek out that time for thinking and reflecting, even if the conversations don't happen and aren't apparently happening in the home. One consequence, however, of this, of not being able to engage in such talk beyond the school or the church, is that children's spiritual literacy and awareness will vary. So how then can the school and church encourage spiritual awareness and literacy of all pupils? As Lisa Miller points out, we are keen to lean in and support children who struggle with subjects such as English and maths. We'll bring all the support in there and lean in on that so that they're supported through that struggle. What about those who struggle with spiritual literacy and awareness? And what about the SEND students as well that struggle completely? Where is there that support with their spiritual literacy? And is there support for their spiritual literacy? Have we thought about that in terms of our SEND students? The final slide of this PowerPoint then summarises the key findings and signposts people to the main report for further information should they want it. So, you know, this whole PowerPoint here does summarise and unpack the PDF of the same topic. And as I say, we've got other PowerPoints for different topics and different PDFs. So hopefully you agreed that this captures the main findings of the report related to faith conversations in the home and does encourage groups to come together to reflect and share on what it means for them in their context. Because at any point of these slides, you can make that your own in terms of the questions that you asked, the pause for consideration that you have. There are lots of different angles that you can come at with these slides. For instance, on this one, if I go back to this one, if you look at the table on this slide, I hope it's clear. It's not that clear for me. as I'm looking at it. But we were saying here that the most common topics raised and discussed in the home with children are topics that look at the existence and nature of God, that look at creation and the origins of life, that look at death and religion and science. But this table could generate some discussion about the other topics that aren't really spoken of in the home, or didn't get mentioned as much, such as the Trinity. Children said they didn't speak much about the Trinity. That didn't come up as a conversation in the home. And really interestingly was Bible stories. That scored quite low as well. And when we look at the main findings of Faith in the Nexus, it became apparent, it was revealed that the Bible wasn't discussed much in the home. I know parents on this one, they're represented by the orange bar, seem to suggest that Bible stories are spoken of. Children had a different view on this, but children said that they often went off on their own to read their Bibles. And in fact, the actual presence of a Bible in the home came from gifts more often than not. Gifts from their grandparents, or gifts from the school or the local parish or church, and that the children did value those. They valued those Bibles. They would take them off to the quietness of their room and read them. But it certainly didn't appear on this survey that it was spoken much in the home. But again, that could be something you could discuss with your audience about the topics that tend to encourage conversations in the home. So, as I say, these are set out so that you can adapt them as long as the main content isn't adapted, and you can stop where you want to discuss the various aspects that are important to your context. So I hope that gives you an overview of what we've got here, particularly with this particular topic. And I am going to hand over to questions and discussions in a moment. It may be about the actual content, about the findings. It may be about the resources. It might be that you've used the resources and it'd be good to have some more feedback about them. But I really am eager to hear from yourselves as well. And I'm not sure, Anne, if there's anything you want to add.
Just on mute. Just to say that, you know, really this is just a taster of what we've got and what we've been developing, and we're quite interested in feedback of how you might use these, but also any questions about the research findings that we've got in there. You know, we're quite open to discussing, you know, why is that in there and why is that not in there. Now, I think that's really what we're trying to do, is just stimulate a conversation, and to be able to use these in school and church settings to sort of get a conversation going as to why we should be paying attention to this area, because this is what the whole point of the research was listening to the children. What did the children think was important, and what they thought important was talking about faith, having space, which they explained they had in schools, in their RE lessons, in worship, in that. But often, you know, how it happened in the home was not the same way. And the other question is how it happened in church was often is not seen. They didn't often speak about the chance to ask questions within a church setting as they did within the school.